Hansel, Gretel, and the Candy House. Once upon a time, there were two siblings named Hansel and Gretel. Their mother had passed away when they were very young, so Hansel and Gretel lived with their father in a small house. One day, their father took the two children into the forest to play. But sadly, Hansel and Gretel got lost in the middle of the vast forest. The two children held hands and tried to find their way home. They walked and walked, but they could not find the way out. Hansel reached into his pocket and found a small piece of bread. He dropped the piece of bread on the ground, hoping it would help them find their way home. But a little bird flew down from the sky and ate the piece of bread. Hansel and Gretel felt very sad. They sat under a tree and rested for a while. Then, suddenly, they smelled something sweet. "What is that smell?" Gretel asked. The sweet smell was so delicious that the two children could not resist it. They stood up and followed the smell deeper into the forest. Before long, they saw a house that was both strange and beautiful. Hansel walked up to the wall and touched it. "It's chocolate!" He broke off a small piece and put it into his mouth. "Yummy!" Gretel looked up at the roof. "It's cake!" She reached up, took a small piece of cake from the roof, and tasted it. "So sweet!" Suddenly, the door of the house opened by itself. An old woman was standing at the door. "Come inside, children," she said with a warm smile. "I live here all by myself. I am very lonely." The old woman looked kind and friendly, so Hansel and Gretel went inside. She brought them all kinds of candy, cookies, and cakes. "Eat, children, eat as much as you like." The two children were very hungry, so they kept eating and eating. They had never tasted anything so delicious before. But while the children were busy eating, the old woman quietly prepared a knife in the kitchen. "Tomorrow," she said to Gretel, "you can help me make a fire. I want to cook something very special." Hansel began to feel worried when he heard this. That night, the old woman took Hansel into a small room and locked the door. "Stay here, little boy," she said. "I will give you plenty of food so you can grow bigger." Hansel was very scared, but he tried to stay calm. Gretel was frightened too. She knew that the two of them had to find a way to escape. The next morning, Gretel heard the old woman preparing the fire. She saw the old woman bending down to check the oven. Suddenly, Gretel came up with a plan. "Grandma, I'm here to help you make the fire," she said. The old woman opened the door and stepped into the kitchen. Gretel waited patiently for the right moment. When the old woman bent down near the oven, Gretel suddenly pushed her forward and quickly shut the oven door. The old woman could not get out. Gretel quickly ran to Hansel and opened the door of the small room. "Hansel, you're free!" The two siblings hugged each other tightly. Then they searched the candy house together. Behind a small door, they found a box. Hansel opened the box. Inside were beautiful jewels, shining gold coins, and sparkling pearls. "Look, Gretel!" The two siblings happily gathered the treasures and took them with them. Then they left the candy house and followed a small path through the forest. They walked and walked. At last, Hansel and Gretel found their way home. Their father was standing outside the house. When he saw his children, he was overjoyed. "You're back!" Hansel and Gretel said together. They showed their father the treasure they had found. From that day on, life became much better for the three of them. They no longer had to worry about going hungry. Hansel grew up to become a wonderful cook. Gretel always loved little animals, and she had many cats at home. The three of them lived happily together in a warm and cozy house. Deep inside the forest, the candy house was still standing. Its walls were still made of chocolate, and its roof was still covered with cakes. But Hansel and Gretel never went back there again. And after the story of the two siblings, no child ever dared to enter the candy house again.